Hi, and welcome to Home Recording 101. I'm Ren, and I'm going to be your host for this episode. Today, we're on episode 2 of our series on the gear you're going to need to set up your recording studio at home. We're going to be talking about computers today. Basically, I want to cover a couple of things right off the bat. Number one, if you're going to be recording at home and want to be able to really grow into a really good process, I would recommend that you use a separate computer for your recording than you do your everyday use. There's a lot of reasons for that, but mainly you can keep the computer offline, which eliminates a lot of the threat of malware and viruses and that type of thing. The other thing is that the way your computer is set up for daily use is not optimal for recording. Usually, when you have a recording system or a recording setup, you want as little or as few processes running in the background as possible, so to free up processing speed. So for that reason, I really recommend having a separate computer for recording than your everyday use. Of course, you can use your everyday computer for recording if it's got the proper specs. Again, I really recommend going the other way. There's two kinds of computers that you can consider for recording: Mac or PC. A Mac, first and foremost, is designed for media manipulation, for video editing and those types of things, for audio capturing and processing, graphics design and functionality. A PC tends to have a looser architecture. In other words, what I mean is, rather than Mac, which kind of runs in a straight line all the way through, a PC has an architecture that kind of sends something over here before it can go over here to where it can go here to there and finally come to your output or your screen. So it's a little less functional in terms of working with media. I personally prefer a Mac over a PC. So let's look at what the minimum requirements are for your computer that you're going to need for recording. You're going to want to have, if it's a Mac, an OS X 10.11 or higher. If it's a PC, Windows 7, 8, or 10, 64-bit, Home, Professional, or Unlimited, in any of those versions will work perfectly fine. A minimum of Core i5 processor, and I would recommend a 4-core Core i5. The more cores you have, the better processing you have, the more options you have for processing. The fewer cores, the harder the computer is going to have to work to do the same work. You want to have a minimum of 4 gigabytes of RAM, and that's really a bare bones minimum. If you're not going to be doing a lot of work multi-tracking, if you're going to have, be working really just doing guitar vocal or a couple of guitars, a couple of vocals, maybe 8 to 10 tracks at the most in your audio recording, not really a lot of computer-based instruments or plugins or anything like that. 4 gigs will be okay. You'll want to have plenty of USB ports for an iLok or a licensing device, especially for Pro Tools or for Cubase. I think some of the other ones don't require that. And you want to have plenty of USB, Firewire, Thunderbolt expansion slots for your supported I/O device that you're going to use, and we're going to talk about that in the next episode. So those are the basics that you want to have. Really, to get a recommended setup, something that'll give you more than enough power to get going, more than enough room to grow into, I would recommend, if you're on a Mac, get OS X 10.13.1, which is the current release at this time. An Intel Core i7 processor, quad core. It's a little bit faster, better architecture. So it's a smoother processing. I would recommend a minimum, really starting of 8 gigs, but if you can do 16 or even 32 gigs, depending on your processing setup, the more the merrier, the more you're going to be able to do better. The other thing is thinking about a hard drive. Most computers come with a standard hard drive system that's the old disk that has a little arm that moves back and forth to read off of the disk. It's a mechanical system, and they tend to have a lot of problems down the road. They don't last as long as maybe you would want them to. So if you have the budget and can afford a few $100s more, I'd really recommend going to an SSD hard drive, especially as your primary drive or your program drive. SSD is solid state. There's no moving parts. It's kind of like a thumb drive for your hard drive, only more storage and higher speed. With an SSD drive, it will speed up the process of everything that you do. Your computer will boot and start up faster. It'll open your programs faster. It will run your programs better and smoother. Everything just works better on an SSD drive. So if you can afford it, I would go that way. I would recommend looking, again, as a starting computer for your recording, start off on the right foot and go with a Mac. For my dollar, the iMac is a good place to start. Their entry level for or quad core processor i5 starts at around $1,200 and gives you 8 gigs of RAM, plenty of everything that you need to get started. I would also recommend getting an external CD DVD drive burner so you can burn CDs if you want to. And at that level, with those kinds of things, you're going to top out at about $1,500 to $1,700 for a really, really nice computer, loaded up the way you want to. On a PC, I would stay away from all-in-ones. I would stay only with tower computers for a couple of reasons. They're expandable, and you can grow them. You can easily add RAM to them. You can add PCI boards for things like FireWire, external video, additional video cards, and those kinds of things. So they're really, really functional in that respect. And I know that PCs, by the time you get a comparable PC to the iMac Mini with a monitor and everything, you're going to be pretty close in the same price range, in the $1,200 to $1,400 range for a decent PC. So for my money, the Mac's a better way to go. So that kind of gives you the heads up on your computer and what you're going to need to get started with. Remember that your computer is probably the most important part of your recording chain. So don't skimp on it. Don't go cheap. Get as good as you can possibly afford to get, and you'll do yourself well by doing so. So that covers the computer portion of our series on equipment. I hope it was informative. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at info@arencreative, and that's right here on the screen. I'll be happy to communicate with you with any questions that you have, and I will answer every email. So that really covers computers in this episode of our series. Our next episode is going to cover I/O devices, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, hope you have a great day and happy recording.